Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. This one a special edition as it's being released right now. This is my interview with Crawley, BSC, the cinematographer who shot The Brutalist, and he just now won an Oscar. So this episode was supposed to come out this Thursday. I'm going to release it now to celebrate. I actually got to meet him at the Kodak Awards a couple days ago, which is pretty cool. And yeah, of course, this was recorded a couple weeks ago, so no Oscar talk or anything. But congratulations to Lol, very well deserved, and enjoy the episode. Have you been watching anything recently?
Not super recently. I've been doing so much press. I've been literally just got back from Europe and stuff. I watched this film, I'm Still Here, which
Sure.
I thought that was like extraordinary, and I think it's a really great year. I think there's some really good movies out. So, but yeah, just trying to. I'm looking forward to getting back into, having some more time.
Yeah, that does seem to be the common theme, because I try to ask everyone that, because it's like maybe someone will mention something I haven't heard or whatever, but especially during promo, or if someone's shooting something else, it's like, what are you talking about? I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Can't even pause a film.
It'd be nice to go back to get to the cinema. I mean, I was just at the Rotterdam Film Festival, and I didn't get to see anything. I mean, I was there for this Robbie Mueller award, but it would have been very nice to have caught a few movies, but unfortunately, no.
Yeah, congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, he was remains a real inspiration, and so it was a very heartfelt award to receive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Lord knows you deserve it for this one. I was able to catch it. It is. I will say it is. I was telling my friends when I left the film, I was like floating leaving that movie, because I was like, this feels. I kept just telling people, like, however we look at The Godfather, that's how we're going to look at this film. Like, right. It has the same vibe for me. But Lord, it looks great. But you do have to commit. I got there at 11:30, and I think I left at 4:30. So it is a day. The intermission is perfect. It was like the moment I started getting a little fidgety, it was like intermission, and I was like, that's timed perfectly.
Amazing.
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Thank you.
I guess we should just get into it, because there's kind of a lot to talk about. I wanted to know, because obviously it's not like a huge budget. Yeah, I think so. I saw the math. Someone pointed out that like Red One, that Santa movie for Amazon, costs more than like all of the movies that have been nominated for Oscars combined.
Oh wow! Wow, that's cause for a discussion, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think it was like 250 for Red One. And then you made yours for what, like 10?
10. Yeah.
And I think obviously people seem to really love A24 as like a distributor and stuff, but they've created their own like brand around it, kind of like Criterion. But I think audiences now are really pushing for films that back in the day, you had smaller budget films. Studios weren't as nitpicky. I think people are recognizing that that's the movie they want to see, and not things that are like overly managed. Not that I love a Marvel film just as much as anyone.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's room for everything, but it's if digital spectacle filmmaking is the choice, then it's like, well, okay, let's have that. Let's have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I like it. The whole point of this was just to say, when you were saying like it's a good year for film, I agree. I think there's a lot of amazing films that have come out this year that are just stunning, and it's fun to go to the cinema again and not experience the sameness.
Yeah.
So what for The Brutalist? What was the pre-production like? Because obviously, cinematography podcast, we got to talk about choosing to shoot VistaVision, because that's like an interesting.
Yeah.
Because in my head I was like, you could have gone 16 if you were looking for like a look, or you
Yeah.
could have gone full IMAX, although not on your budget probably. And then, like, did you have to find those cameras? Did you have to like retrofit them, or how did that go? And then also just, it's such an epic, but looking back on it in my head, you don't have like a ton of locations, so how are you maximizing? Would you shoot for like a month? How are you maximizing that time?
So yeah, so okay, so it was my third film with Brady, and we'd always shot film. I mean, all Childhood of a Leader, Vox Lux, and The Brutalist, they all share a sort of kind of commonality in some regards. There's definitely it's like an unofficial trilogy in some regards. And Brady is sort of exercising certain ideas and themes and things he wants to articulate across all three films, I feel. As a consequence, film has always been the chosen medium, and so, we've always shot 35. And then for this one, Brady was like, I really want to explore the idea of VistaVision, and the arguments for VistaVision, like any accusations of it being a gimmick or being an affectation or whatever you might regard, how you might regard it. I think the VistaVision camera system earns its place in this movie because, it's a film about architecture and vistas. And I mean, essentially the VistaVision format existed in the 1950s, and a lot of the movie is set in the 1950s. So Brady was like, well, sure, I want a camera system, from that time, Hitchcock famously used it on, Vertigo, and I think North by Northwest, maybe. So yeah, it's, so that's kind of how, that was the original idea for it. And I did some testing with the VistaVision format, and then realized, well, I mean, I guess we knew, but not to the extent that we sort of discovered the increased field of view. So basically, it's like if you want a wider field of view, you have to go on a wider lens with the VistaVision, because the neg area is it's like
it's the original full frame.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a stills camera pulls through. It's still 35 mil, so that's one thing that some people get confused about. But I know, so it's still 35 mil, but you're pulling it through horizontally 8 perfs at a time. So yeah, it's the original full frame. And as a consequence, the bigger the neg or the bigger the sensor area, as we know, the wider the field of view. So it's kind of like taking the blinkers off. And then the aspect ratio of VistaVision, its native aspect ratio is 1.5 to 1, I think, something close to that. So given that we frame 1.66, it made more sense to use VistaVision. Not that we could have afforded 65 on this budget, but it made more sense if we wanted a larger neg area to really use the VistaVision.
Yeah. Well, the look, there's something that was fascinating about it. Is one, I've thought for a long time that VistaVision should come back, because again, the idea that we're all clamoring for these full frame digital cameras, it's like we have it on film. If you can do that, and there's not really a, I was talking to Hoyta about Oppenheimer. I almost said The Optimist. And he was talking about, IMAX and grain and all that. But even with VistaVision, there wasn't necessarily a strong grain character. However, I did notice that you guys left in a lot of, there was no like dust busting in post. A lot of the like,
that's right. No.
And I was wondering why you chose to leave all that there.
I mean, it was kind of Brady's ultimate sort of like desire to, I think, be unapologetic really about the film aspect and about I mean, we certainly didn't add dust, but he wanted it to feel like a print, even if you saw the DCP, And I think he wanted to feel like it to feel like film. And he'd always, early on, he'd spoken about this idea of it kind of being almost like having an archival quality, or even like a little bit of a patchwork quality, like embracing some of the inconsistencies or differences. I mean, as a DP, that's a little tricky, because the whole idea of being of doing a DI on the movie is that you're sort of ironing out the inconsistency. So trying to find that balance is interesting. But I think we were successful in trying to like embrace the accidents or embrace the embrace the kind of, you know, embrace a certain spontaneity and what things are offering up. And the very fact of shooting on film, of course, you know what you're doing, or I know what I'm doing in terms of exposing the film and how I'm treating the film and push processing the film and how much I light. And I mean, I've shot 12 movies on film, so I've got better at it, as you know, the more that I've done. But you're still not hand holding the neg through the bath, you know. And so anyone that's taken a photograph on film and had there's a real joy in those prints coming back, you know, where you actually kind of finally see what the alchemical process has delivered, you know. And I think that's something we've embraced in many ways across the films together, is that not relinquishing a certain amount of control. That doesn't mean being careless or sloppy or unprepared. It just means being open to the moment when something can, you know, transcend as far as Brady and I have been able to take it. Not all filmmakers operate in that way, but I personally am drawn to that sort of philosophy.
Yeah, you know, I was just thinking about that the other day, how digital cinematography in just, you know, sort of modern, I don't know, corporate art, I guess. Not that all art is corporate, but a lot of corporations are on art, is that the shooting film allows for there still to be an element of surprise and wonder for experts. You know, like if you're an expert at something, the kind of joy potentially can go away because you're learned in it. But then shooting film always has this element of like, all right, still Christmas, you know.
Yeah, I know. And then excuse me, you're also relying on other experts, which is really good, you know. People working in the lab or the colorists, who they're not creating the movie for you, but they're finessing your vision, you know. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's about being on the same page and calibrated together to produce this thing, you know. And I think, you know, to your point, every single frame of film is different. Every silver halide is dancing in a different way, and so there's this continual sort of shifting. Whereas creating on a digital image, it's there's it's a completely different capturing process, you know. And I mean, Tarantino's spoken about it recently, or at least I've discovered what he was saying recently. You know, the magic of cinema for him is the persistence of vision, the optical illusion. It's like a flicker book. You are watching an optical illusion. This isn't actually moving. And of course, you can say there's a version of that with digital, but it's not the same thing, you know.
Well, and it doesn't feel the same. And also, I do think, going back to the idea of like what audiences like and delighting audiences, not is like, they know, because of just our, you've been promoting this thing forever, because of how available the filmmakers are now. People are aware of when you shoot on film, and people, I think audiences appreciate that because it's a little harder, you know, and they're like, I want to see someone put some effort, even though the effort doesn't really change all that much between them, but they know it's like there's I guess stakes, you know, the film can explode or whatever.
Well, no, yeah, and I tell you what, it's you know, there's far more sleepless nights shooting film, you know, than digital, and it is interesting because one could make the argument, okay, if you shoot on film, if you shoot on digital, you're on set and you're seeing the image and you're like, okay, collectively darker, bolder, interesting, darker. Doesn't work that way. I've always made the more bold choices. And in some regards, maybe the stronger cinematography on film, and it's kind of interesting because it is slightly counterintuitive, that argument, but it's that's how it's just resulted for me. But I've had some very, very sleepless nights, and it's like, it's like, take all your time and money, take everything, put it through this aperture. I got this, and then you're like, oh, I don't got this, and it's a lot of responsibility. It's but you also need a director and producers that if you're going to expose the way that we do, and you're gonna, like, you're really gonna be, it's the way Harris Civides used to shoot, who was an inspiration, and you're really going to be on the edge, which I think where the good stuff is. If you fall in and you get it wrong, you need you don't want to be fearful of a backlash. You need support, and to be like, it's fine, no worries, we'll redo it, or maybe we don't, like whatever it is, but you need to be in it together and trust, if you're really exposing the film in that way.
Yeah. Did you guys in the grade? I was thinking about this because film, the artistic intent is built into the negative in many ways, but now we do have very robust post-production tools that, regardless regardless of capture medium, you can do interesting stuff. Were you? I assume you shot 5219.
Yes, yeah, and
it's the only one left.
Well, we did the 250 as well. My main stocks are the 250 daylight and the 500T.
So what if anything were you doing in the grade to kind of, aside from just like balancing, but were you like imparting a look on it at all, or
No, I wouldn't say imparting a look. I do very much. I try to lock it in camera as much as possible, and so I percentage wise, I don't know. I mean, I think we're a good 85%. When I go in the evening with Mate, the colorist, and often with Brady as well, and our editor David, we see the image, and part of it is celebratory about, because we're very happy with what we're getting, but then a percentage that's critical as well. Okay, how do we like this? Can we do better? Or it's that constant calibration. Keeping us all on the straight and narrow, I suppose. Just to keep checking in and making sure that they're on the right track. But yeah, most of the time I'm pretty pleased with what's there. Sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, it's darker than I intended, or Mate, our colorist, is then pulling up the image, and then we might have more grain. So then we might use tools to degrain it. There have also been times we've added grain and things in shots just for consistency. But the important thing to say is that Mate Turniak was our colorist throughout. He didn't start as our final colorist. He started as our dailies colorist. And then when we realized that his taste and expertise were aligned, it just was a no-brainer to use him. And so really it was, I mean, I would describe it as like the process as finessing the intent of the photography, and he understood the intent of the photography. So like, I've never shot a film where I've gone into the DI and it's been like, okay, what's the film going to look like?
Right.
Because I've done so much work with the director beforehand that the colorist is not involved in, so it's like, it's really a process of kind of like really knowing what the look is to a very high percentage. But then what's really important about having that relationship, especially shooting on film, is I've had other experiences on film where I've had a very alarmed phone call at the end of the day because the printer lights, which are, where the film is supposed to be sitting exposure-wise, are way off, so you end up with a very thin negative, and then the printer lights are way low. What was good with Mate, working with him very early on, and him understanding the aesthetic and the taste, was that I wasn't really getting those alarming phone calls. He might say, oh, you want to come in tonight because we should take a look at this. Let's just make sure we're on the, which is a much better way of doing it. You have it's better for your sleep,
Right.
so you're not having that alarm. So he was terrific in that regard. But I think it's fair to say that we approached it with as much of a photochemical process as possible. Not, obviously it wasn't a photochemical process; it was a digital intermediate. But what I mean by that is you don't start by putting shapes on eyes and tracking things and all. I mean, all this stuff is amazing and you can do it. But I think if you overdo it, the sense of the kind of the origination on film, it starts to feel a little overworked, and you have I think it's best to start as if it's a photochemical grade. So you're doing everything holistically across the image and then do other passes. And I also, with the DI, I like to work quite quickly, in the sense that I often find if you bump on something, the answer lies ahead. So if so it's if you're struggling with something, move on, and then it will reveal itself. And so I like to do kind of a broad pass through, and then another pass that's more, maybe 2 or 3 passes for a movie.
Yeah. I mean, even with digital, I find that once you, to your point about like origination on film or whatever, just the sort of quote unquote cinematic look is less touched, because like the second you start pulling out skin tones from the background and
Yeah.
shifting them too aggressively, you're like, nothing looks like that. Like,
No.
sometimes you have to, but usually nothing looks like that.
It's interesting when I work with colorists, that when the happiest I am is when, and coming back to this photochemical idea, sometimes you'll go down a road and then they just go, hang on a minute, and they just junk it and they throw
Yep.
it out and they go right back to the beginning again, because the most successful image for me is not one that has a node upon a node upon a node upon a node, and suddenly you're like twisting it to get to, and there's that, the recognition that there's a much simpler line from A to B. That's an interesting one for me.
Yeah. So for I know a lot of the film has this kind of greenish tone that I found very pretty. Was that found in the grade, or is that done in? Is that just the film's reaction to certain lights?
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't intentional. It's sort of I mean, you're not the first to have mentioned it. I mean, I think it is the film's reaction to certain lights, and then maybe just the alchemy, the alchemical process. I don't remember having I spoke to Mate about this as well. I don't remember having conversations where we were intentionally pushing in more green. I think, I mean, there are certain points like where Laszlo meets his cousin Attila off the bus I look at that now and I can recognize that. But then a lot of it just, I don't know, just kind of felt like that's where the scenes should sit,
Yeah. Well, the only reason I ask is so that if you did something, I'm like, good, I'm stealing it. Because that's half this podcast, just me stealing ideas. What else was there? Because I'm trying to stay linear. If given my own devices, I will jump between topics and not.
No, I'm happy to jump. However you want to do it.
Yeah, I guess. I guess this is a bit of a jump. When you were talking about the aspect ratio and stuff, one thing I really loved about your photography on this film is there's a lot of frames within frames, a lot. And I was wondering if you could kind of walk me through the mindset there of like, was that like super intentional? Is that just kind of your thing, or what was that approach?
It's kind of my thing. I mean, like I know Brady and I had sort of referenced Hammershoy, the painter Hammershoy at times. And I think, for Childhood of a Leader, the first film, I think it's probably owes more of a debt to Hammershoy in some regards. I mean, it's set in Europe, and it probably feels more of a European movie than the Brutalist, of course. But I think it's my taste, and what I gravitate towards. Like I obviously don't want to do the same thing on every movie, but I think there are certain signatures. Auteur theory is based on the kind of idea of a directorial signature, or at least a worldview and an idea of wanting to say something across an oeuvre of films. And I think to a certain degree, that's inescapable for a cinematographer as well. Like, there are some things I just can't do, which I'm okay with. Like if the choices are sort of a jack of all trades or being guilty of repeating motifs,
Yeah.
then, I'd probably embrace the latter. I mean, I think there's so I don't know. Like what I like to do is to find, once we have the locations, I really like to work in real locations. I like restrictions. I don't, you know, if I'm not able to move a wall, I can still find the scene and find the shot. So when we had to find the locations, I like to go there on my own without the director, without it, and just have. It's the only time I'm in that space when no one else exists. In that thing. Every other time it's a tech scout or it's shooting or something. And for me, I haven't really spoken about this with regards to this film, but it's so important to me because it's like sometimes when you're on set, you're trying to find something and there's lots of things going on and distractions. If you can spend time in a set or in a location rather, and study the light for a certain period of time on your own, you can lock yourself into certain frames, or at least have them as your version of storyboards or shot lists that work. And whereas it's hard to find that when there's a ton of people in front of the frame or occupying the space. And so in those instances, maybe I do find myself kind of like, oh, this is interesting. Like I can't move a wall, but what if we shoot through this doorway? Or maybe a scene feels like it lends itself to a certain voyeurism or a distance from the characters, and yeah, often I think I'm often just trying to, if we go to a location out and like I see a set of stairs and I'll run up it and look up there, like I'll try and examine every single angle of what's there and then take the images and then I'll revisit the script and I'll be like, is that applicable? Does this feel motivated? And so yeah, examination of the space, really.
Well, that's such a smart idea too, because like, there's a book, I think, I can't remember who wrote it. I used to have this guy's name, Stephen Coulter, about flow states and how when the basically beginning of a flow state, it's a cyclical process, and when you finally hit flow, usually comes from inspiration from like stopping. When you like walk up to go do something else and you're like, there it is, and so just wandering around in a room and kind of not having distractions and just kind of playing with I shouldn't say playing with yourself, but by yourself, is so smart. I remember I was talking to Eric Messerschmidt and he was saying how like there's only like probably 3 good angles in any given set or room. So just being able to sit there and find the actual good ones and not like the most economically viable, schedule wise, is a good move.
It's tricky if you have a film like The Humans that I shot, which all takes place in a New York apartment, it's that balance between, okay, is repetition interesting and important because there's a repetition to the behavior of the characters, or is that an integral idea, or is it a weakness, because for an audience you're just returning to the same angles. I mean, for that movie The Humans, there was a lot of frames within frames. I mean, there was like 2 doorways that we're shooting through, and so the scene was right in the back of the frame and things like that. So it's it's interesting. I mean, I definitely gravitate towards these kind of discussions over the technical, and the idea of storytelling and how, where the camera is placed in terms of like who is the camera? Is it subjectivity versus objectivity, and how all this stuff that is just obviously like because then you're like, it's also, you might find a frame that you like aesthetically, but it might not serve that scene well,
Yeah. And that's always a bummer. Then you just have to take a photo,
Yeah.
That's a behind the scenes photo.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you shoot? Are you a photographer by chance?
Yeah. I was having this conversation about shooting on set. I would love to come away with a whole from a movie and have all these additional photographs. But I find I'm so focused in the moment that I, for me, they're two different things, and I'm sort of like so intense on producing the 24 frames every second that I don't sit back and sort of like put a different head on to do this, you know. So it's I'd like to be able to. Maybe I'll get better at it, but yeah, I would like to do more.
Yeah,
Have
and then
more of those memories, you know.
well, and then you can pull a Fraser and release a book, coffee table book.
Yes, yeah. Right.
Um, I was again when I was talking to Hoyta, I was like, "Hey, so all these behind the scenes footage, you got this like Leica. Are you gonna like release a book?" He goes, "Oh no, that's just to check the light. I show, Nolan and then delete it." I'm like, "Oh, that's a very expensive like Polaroid, you know."
Oh yeah. So is it but this is a Leica digital that he's using?
Yeah, I thought it was film.
Right. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, that's what they used to do, isn't it, with Polaroids, you know, take a Polaroid of the, and then as a reference, you know.
Yeah. Now we have EL zones. Although I'm still a spot meter guy. I still
Yeah, no, me too, especially on film, you know, because most of the time also my incident meter tells me to go home, you know, like it just there is no light. So then
yeah,
I'm like,
EO.
well, so I spot read, and as long as I'm getting, you know, two stops under on a face, it's like I don't know, like it's just where I tend to sit the negative.
Yeah. Do you find that you shoot, I assume, do you do like commercial work and that kind of stuff? Yeah. I assume that's normally digital.
It
Uh,
is.
do you expose your digital negative, so to speak, differently than film, or is it all kind of the same brain for you?
No, I mean, I think, you know, the humans I spoke about, we shot digitally, and I work with a lot where it's like, you know, a stop and a half under, and I'm trying to find some way of like, I'm always, when we shoot film, we always distress the film, and by that I mean we're underexposing it and push process it and trying to take the modernity even out of modern film stocks, you know, for this period thing we're trying to explore. So it becomes much more like pictorialist photography or an impression of something, like a dream of a dream of a. So we're always trying to kind of like do that with it. With digital, that's even harder, of course, to try and achieve because the starting point has its just has a, you know, I mean, I try not to run towards the 6K and the 8Ks and things like that, you know. I mean, I'm really excited by, like, you know, the photography of like the holdovers and things like that. I mean, I thought it was a really beautiful looking film, you know, and it's shot digitally. So often I'm trying to sort of like pull up or embrace digital grain or whatever, you know, digital sort of like noise, I guess. I mean, I mean, it's so sad that Harris passed away when he did, because I think, you know, Harris Simides was like, could have, you know, I'm sure he would be coming up with some really amazing looks on digital.
Yeah.
You know, uh, yeah, I think I'm always just trying to find, I mean, it's, you know, everyone's trying to do it with old glass and whatever, but it's like trying to find some way of just putting in the alchemy back in, you know, the sort of unpredictable qualities or the kind of something that feels a little bit more like life, you know, into a I mean, digital cameras are beautiful in their own way, but there's invariably a little bit of a sterility because each frame is not alive, you know, in a different way to the previous frame, you know. So I think we're trying to always do something that, I mean, I do think it's interesting that, like with the show The OA I shot digitally, we were really trying to like,
I love that show.
right, oh, thank you. I shot the first season of it.
Oh, that's so cool. I should
Um,
have looked up your IMDb.
um, I do think there's something really interesting, like with the Sony A7S, was it, that came out where there was a whole, you can still find it, but there was like a promotional short that was all shot under moonlight, you know, and when there was this stuff on images on the beach. I mean, I almost kind of like really want to do, you know, lean into digital in for the use it for the things you can't use film for, like really take it to its nth degree. And I would still really love to kind of shoot a film that was shot digitally, but was done all under very, very, very low light. Probably it's always still low light, but something that just I think digital comes into its own when it's struggling,
Mm.
you know, and yeah. So
That I was just talking to Faden about A Complete Unknown, and that was one of the reasons why he shot on the Venice, was because they could shoot 12,800
yes,
at a deeper stop
yeah,
at night.
yeah, yeah. I heard that. Yesterday. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he just had, you could watch the behind the scenes footage. It's just one of those Roscoe Dash domes. And then you'll see the behind the scenes. He told me that, he had the dimmer and sometimes it would just be off. But in the behind the scenes photos, you see a grip with this thing on a pole following Timmy Chalamet down the road. And it's clearly off.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's a beautiful looking film, and yeah, I think I think we're all seeking that kind of struggle, and I don't, I just mean there's something interesting when the technology, whether it's film or digital, where the technology struggles a little bit.
Mm.
I think it makes the audience just work a little harder, where everything isn't suddenly presented and present and offered up. I think the most interesting images are when the eye is having to kind of search around and work a little harder.
Yeah, that does. Now I've got three topics that I got, but to that exact point, I noticed a lot of your very diffuse light feels like it's fighting to get through whatever fabric is in front of it, and I was just like, yes, I like it. I do want to get to that in a second, but to your point about the holdovers, I spoke to Eigel about that because he's really cool, and I just DM'd. I left the movie. I didn't even know he shot it. And I was like, I DM'd him. I was like, you want to come back on the show? He's like, yeah. But he was saying that, to your point about having to regrain parts of the Brutalist, he tested a bunch of different film stocks and he found that 5219 was too clean. And so they were going to have to regrain it anyway, even if they shot 16. So he was like, you know what, let's just shoot digital and do it all in post. Cause they would end up having to do it on film anyway.
Interesting.
I was like, that's fascinating. Cause the film was on the table and he was like, it was too modern.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know that bit. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. But earlier I said I like stealing from people. What do you feel that you've stolen from Harris?
I think the idea of lighting the room, and lighting the space, and not, and giving a freedom to the actors and the performance and the director at that point. I think the idea of being bold. I mean, Birth. You're in Central Park and it looks like a Peter Bruegel painting. It's like I think just searching for the same ideas, this idea of kind of like pictorialist photography, of the early 20th century, this like a non-literal, a sort of non-literal version of image making, there's also, like I mentioned, Robbie Mueller and Anthony Dodd Mantle and Robbie Ryan, and I mean, there's different things. I mean, I definitely feel like they're my tribe, those cinematographers, but there's also different, like with Robbie Ryan, for example, for me, it's not about his lighting. It's about his operating with the actors, and I get a lot of that, and I mean, and also the way he's exposed to the negative, but, like Wuthering Heights that he shot for Andrea Arnold, is like a wonderful, wonderful example of that, where it all just kind of like, it's just so beautifully connected. Or American Honey, like beautifully, beautifully connected to the audience, to the, like being this almost vessel between the performance and the audience. And in that moment between action and cut is this incredible kind of like connection and response, sort of like lyricism to the camera work, So I don't know. I think they're all. I think there's a connection between a lot of these cinematographers that I like. I gravitate more towards that than the sort of like than the classical imposition of, or in position light, but the classical kind of crafting of lighting a scene every single time, like I sometimes I do, but it's on a scene by scene rather than this idea of that every scene needs my lighting stamp upon it.
Mm. Well, that's a great transition to, because I did want to talk about the lighting. Obviously, in a lot of scenes, it seems to just be direct sunlight, or at least a kind of a direct fixture if they're indoors. But I really loved the interplay between the very hard light and the softer stuff. And normally I'm a little more vague, but I thought watching the film, I was like, hold on, I have time to actually. I wanted you to walk me through the lighting for the diner scene where he gets pulled off the coal pile.
Yeah.
And the lighting that, and then the first dinner scene, with everyone around the table in what's his face's house, Van Buren's house.
Oh, Van Buren's house. Is it when do you mean when Erzsébet?
No,
No,
when it's just him.
big dinner.
Yeah, because I think those are both scenes that everyone ends up being, people around a table and then people at a diner, but also I liked like the little car reflections, and I was like, that either that was added or that was an accident.
That's great. I'm so glad you picked up on that. So yeah, that diner scene, both those scenes you mentioned are examples where we've cross shot the coverage, with two cameras, which is something we sort of rarely do. But it was really just important for the performance, I think, to do that, to serve the purpose. And so I'm willing to compromise a certain lighting control in order to do that. And Saul Leiter, I think, was an influence, strong influence for those diner moments, where we sort of we had sort of steamed up the windows and put spritz on the windows.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm glad you picked up on the lighting of the car, because it was this idea that sunlight was skipping off windscreens and then sort of scudding across the scene. And I really love the idea of like lighting, but having the lighting feeling like accidental or motivated. Like I remember, like, if you're in the back of a car, sometimes you're going down a highway or like a motorway in the UK, and then as you pass under these lights, the street lights, that kind of almost like a reverse effect happens where you see the light going, tumbling or crossing the interior of the car seat, roof of the car. And I love all that, and it's great because it's like, I'm just like, oh, how on earth am I going to recreate that? And then some of that happened in white noise as well. And it's like, it's interesting. It's like this idea of the accidental, but then trying to recreate the accidental, if that makes sense. So yeah, that happened in there. And then the scene in of Van Buren, like, again, was maybe even 3 cameras. I can't remember, but there was a lot of coverage that we needed to do. And so it becomes this sort of mathematical exercise of like, okay, how do we work our way around this, getting all the angles we need, keeping on the same eye lines, matching the lenses, and then I think we left. Is it the scene where they have a large dinner party before it's like a Christmas party?
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
Where Van Buren's at the head of the table and he's talking.
Yep.
And yeah. And so we shot all of that, and then Brady wanted the scene to be intercut when his Jewish heritage is being sort of examined and spoken about, that in order to convey this kind of awkwardness, Brady also wanted to be able to cut to other areas of the house where people are sort of touching their ear or their jewelry or something. So we left a camera behind to get these additional, and I think they were shot in slow-mo as well to give them a slight dreamlike quality. So yeah, and that was really just about lighting the space, pushing in most of the lighting from outside the room, and then trying to find a balance between the tungsten and the daylight. So you had this warm blue kind of quality going, or this cyany and then the candle light and the practical light. So yeah, it was once we'd actually just blocked the scene and figured out the angles, it was then a fairly it's just a fairly straightforward process of trying to work out how do we then carve this up that's beneficial for the actors, so we're on the right people at the right times in terms of where the performance is sitting, so yeah, it's a kind of becomes an exercise at that point.
Yeah. So for the Van Buren household, kind of in general, obviously there's a few night scenes, but were you pretty much just like what was the balance between light coming in through the windows and getting through the shears and stuff, and units on the ground?
Yeah, I think in general, I again like this idea of lighting the space, even though you've got incredibly technically proficient actors, I kind of want them to not. I don't want to limit them too much. Like I remember seeing this early cinematography lighting book when I was learning how to light, and there was like a photo of Meryl Streep, and there's obviously a close up, but there was just like outside of the frame, there was just everything going on. And I came from a tradition of working with non-actors and owing a debt to a certain naturalism. So I think I've, it's evolved for me, but I think that's always been my starting point, I think, is try to kind of like less is more, you know what I mean? Try to just not bring everything in and all this. So I think, most of the time I try to light the space and then maybe like, I don't know, 75% either up in the ceiling so so the actors aren't aware of it too much, or off the set. And then I'll have maybe 25% of smaller fixtures, mostly LED now, or, just because they're quicker and cooler to work with, and change the color temperature quickly without changing gels. So yeah, it's that thing. It's like, okay, the heavy lifting is done outside of the set, or as I say, in the ceiling, or with practical fixtures, and then I'll sort of supplement it with other fixtures on set.
Yeah. And the ceiling, I assume, is just for like kind of an ambient fill kind of.
Yeah, although, like in Childhood of a Leader, I distinctly remember we had these big spaces and we had these very unusual vaulted ceilings. So in some, which we'd never really see, but it gave you all this space to be able to work with. So we had like two pancakes like this in the ceiling, so that when we're shooting this way, we brought this one down in level and a stronger backlight, so you could ping pong between the two. I think it's important. Like there's a difference between illuminating a scene and lighting it,
Yep.
and the lighting of a scene is crafting it and shaping it and denying light and, having your traditional sort of backlight or rim light, blah, blah, blah. And, illuminating a scene is literally just, having enough light to
get to stop.
So, I'll obviously try to craft as much as possible,
Yeah. Do you find that LED has certainly gone through the ringer when it first came out as dog shit, but do you find that film reacts to LED in a different way than digital?
Not in a way that I'm consciously thinking about on set, I think the colorist will find, maybe find more.
Have a different opinion.
Yeah, or obviously not that they're struggling with it, but they'll be making those adjustments maybe before I even come in and see the dailies of an evening, maybe the trainer. But I think that happened much earlier when color temperature was harder there were certain casts and things. But my experience is these things become so refined now that and so technically precise that no, I don't. Yeah, I think the thing that's hardest is trying to keep track of all these things. Like I used to know with tungsten fixtures and HMIs where I was at with these things. Now it's like, an Aladdin or a Sputnik or a thing. And it's like, I can't, like, what was that fixture again? And so I think in that regards, you're really reliant on your gaffers to kind of like, A, be aware what's out there, and B, sort of sort of be able to sort of express what they can do and communicate with you, that, what they're able to achieve,
I found, I was on this documentary recently that required that all the interviews we do match, on like a solid background. And I was I was second unit, and every time we would go in and do a new interview, the producers would like that, so they would get like the full gear list from the
right,
gaffer and stuff, and then send that to the new gaffer, and then I would have to go in from behind them and be like, literally, do not go buy an aperture 1200x, just whatever you've got. It doesn't.
Yeah, sure.
All they want is the 8x. Just trust me. You just use anything else you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, the gear obsession is fun. But it is true. Like the thing that is nice, I will say though, is like everything is coming just crashing down in price. Like you can get an amazing lighting packages at like an indie filmmaker for nothing now, relatively.
Yeah. No, that's right. And also environmentally is important, not plastic gels, the just the power consumption, like we have a responsibility for that towards that as well.
Absolutely. What I didn't even ask, what lenses were you shooting on this? I noticed a very fun zoom. I was excited that there was this.
Oh,
when he walks out of the, like he's shaving and he walks out and you do that whole move. I was like, yeah, fuck yeah.
It's interesting. I was watching The Shining on the plane back from Europe yesterday, and I was like, these linear moves that Kubrick's doing, and then these zooms in, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because it is very much this linear, wide angle, linear move, and then we were on like a Optimo 12:1, I think, so 24:290. I think that was the lens, and yeah. And it's interesting as well because when we really, really, really zoom in on Laszlo and Attila at the end of the scene, it kind of struggles.
Yeah, if it starts to fall apart around the edges.
Yeah, and you can see you can really see that, and then the kind of the compromise that the lens is obviously having to make. But I mean, it's extraordinary how technically precise those lenses are, but you invariably shut down a little bit stopwise, you lose a little bit of light on the long end and things like that, so but yeah, and then the rest of the time we were shooting on the Leica R's, the K, and then Cook S4s, so so we've always used the Cook S4s across all three movies, but yeah, so it's a combination of lenses.
The visual character of an S4 versus a Leica R is interesting. Was there a reason was there a specific reason you would switch between those?
Well, I mean, predominantly we had VistaVision, and the Leica R's on the VistaVision, but then, we had to supplement the Vista, like there were some scenes like on the ship where I had to use a Nari 235, because it was like, I was descending these stairs, and literally if I had an Arri cam, it would have sort of tipped off the shoulder. So there were just certain things that we had to use, certain circumstances we had to employ different devices. But
I did want to talk about that because one, there's I guess this isn't, well, if anyone's listening to this, they should have seen the fucking film. But at the end, you cut to tape.
Yes,
you're shooting tape, and I was just like, I love this. I was so surprised all the time with this film. I just loved it. But but it just made me think, like, there's also like a bunch of B-roll and stuff, and I was like, who was the B-roll person, and did they bring those VistaVision cameras out, or was that like the 235 or whatever, or even digital? Like, how many other formats were you employing?
We had there was some 16. So basically, Adam Filens was our second unit DP, and then there was some 16 mil that Brady wanted. He wanted this kind of like Frederick Wiseman quality to some of the designs. So a loose documentary feel to when Laszlo is designing these pieces of furniture and things like that. So minimal amount of that, and then Arri Cam 235, VistaVision, of course. And then the Betacam. I mean, the idea so Adam was shooting the Betacam whilst I was shooting the VistaVision footage at the end of the scene, at the end of the film, the scene at the end of the film at the Venice Biennale in the Israeli pavilion, you know. And part of that is interesting because a lot of Brady's the films, the three that I've shot for Brady have been sort of an examination of modernity versus antiquity, and this idea of kind of like, are we getting better?
I literally wrote vintage versus modern on here. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and so a lot of the thematically, he's examining this idea of like, are we progressing as a species? You know, in terms of like, you know, I mean, case in point, the Carrera marble quarries, like where the marble for the Pieta and statue of David, and now a lot of that marble is being used for like kitchen countertops or whatever. You know, so it's like,
Yeah.
so in a way, it's like you've seen this whole movie that's on VistaVision on film. And then suddenly it's like, now we have 80s technology. And it, you know, I find it quite amusing, but it's, you know, I'm not sure everyone's picking up on that, but it's interesting. And it's like, it hasn't dated well, this kind of like, it's not digital technology, but it's analog video technology, you know, and it's kind of, it's interesting because it is quite crass when you see it against the kind of like the elegance, let's say, of the other aesthetic, you know. So I think in some ways it's Brady having, and also the music as well. Like
I was going to say, leaving us with that credit music.
well, yeah, there's that, but then also the like Vince Clarke, I believe it was, who was in Erasure, this 80s band. Like he's taken the do 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 this score, and it's like like this 80s electronic kind of like, and some of that stuff's amazing, but it's like it is interesting because it's like it's at odds with this kind of
The journey you've just been on.
and with this kind of sense of antiquity and elegance and stuff. Suddenly it's this whole other era that's represented in this way.
Yeah, no, I love, yeah, I just love how that comes together. It's so awesome. The what else did I have here? Oh, I love how you guys handled night. Night is just black. Yes. I don't need to see it.
Though, isn't it?
The what?
But it is. I mean, night.
Yeah.
You know, I think you have to be careful if you're lighting night that, you know, it doesn't look too much like movie night, you know. And the fact that they're searching for Van Buren at the end in the darkness and stuff, like it's, I mean, we often use day for night as well. Like we've done that in the past, and certainly with Childhood of a Leader and things like that. But it's, yeah. Also, it's, I mean, we could have got a big crane out there and done a big overhead light source and things like that. But I don't know. I think in that moment of the film, it's kind of interesting just seeing these little dots of light going through landscape and then seeing the silhouette of the building. It's kind of, it's ominous, you know.
Yeah, that is something I wanted to know. Like there's on, you know, modest budget, where's there a lot of miniature work, or were you building these buildings or facades even?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a mixture of things. I mean, Judy Becker, our designer, and Brady, you know, very early on, it was clear that they wouldn't have the budget to construct too much of the Institute. So really, it's a mixture of finding locations. So anything that existed in Budapest or Hungary that was made of concrete, you know, they would sort of reappropriate and add design work too. So that was what Judy was doing. And then there's VFX work. So when you see the time lapse of the Institute being built on the hillside and things, that's, you know, VFX. But, you know, obviously the VFX is all it's all based on Judy's designs for the Institute, you know. And then down below the Institute, there's the building site, or the construction site, I believe it's called. So that was essentially a big field where the scaffolding is, and they dug a deep hole where the steps down and the steps up, entering the sort of subterranean aspects of the
like the waterway.
Well, that was a whole other, the water was another thing. So that was basically existed in Budapest. and was like a water holding tank for the city. With
Mm.
the it had these beautiful sort of trumpeted, fluted kind of pillars, and they were just amazing. And so that was yeah, that was just. And then it's interesting because they then find their way into the design of the building, when Van Buren is looking through, so these things sort of inform one another. But yeah, that was really how the institute was and there was some model work as well. They built various models of and then we used a probe camera to sort of move through the corridors of the buildings and things like that.
Mm. I forgot to ask, was there any filtration that you were using?
No, generally very, very little. I tend to just use the usual NDs and polars and
Right.
uh, no, there wasn't. I can't remember any point where we were really leaning into heavy diffusion. The only time we've ever really done that is there was a scene in Vox Lux that was supposed to feel like a. I think the photographer is Bill Henson. I think he's an Australian photographer called Bill Henson, and he had this. I think there's a the book is called Particle Dust or something. Anyway, it's very sort of like diffused, a lot of diffusion, and there was a dance scene in Vox Lux where Celeste is dancing, doing a dance rehearsal, and we stacked up a lot of diffusion, much more than I normally would.
Mm.
And so sometimes I'll do that, but most of the time especially on film, I tend to shoot pretty clean. With digital, I'll use like a digital effects filter or something that will help to take the the sharpness out of the image.
Yeah. I find that I was a big like Black Pro Mist or like Hollywood Black Magic guy. And then I was talking to Ellen Curris and she basically slapped that out of me. She was like, "There's no sensibility. It's just fuzzy." And I was like, "Oh, you're right."
Oh, interesting. Right.
And so now it's like if I do use now, honestly, I pretty much shoot everything. I've become talking about like having a signature. I just shoot everything on my Nicors now.
Okay, right.
It has just it don't need a filter. It's got just enough that it's like it resolves beautifully, but also has a bit of softness to it on a
Yeah.
digital sensor, and it just looks really nice.
Yeah, I shot a film last year and was looking at like super boltars and Cower sphericals, and like they really get quite funky. Like I was trying to like look at the lenses that Hitchcock would have been using and things like that, but they were kind of really interesting on digital to try and see what that did to an image.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I have to let you go because the time is up. But I'd love to have you back on next time you're free to keep chatting about all kinds of stuff. But I did want to. I used to ask this of people, and I forgot, and I just remembered. For as much time as you're willing to give it, talk to me about your as like a wrap up, your path to getting into the BSC.
Oh yeah. I think it essentially came after a film, Hyde Park on Hudson, that I shot. It was shot digitally for Roger Michelle. It was this Bill Murray, Olivia Colman film. And then after it, it went to Camera-Image, and it was in competition at Camera-Image. And then I was invited after that. So I'd had maybe four or five films under my belt by that point. I think 3 is a minimum entry requirement anyway, so for the BSC. But yeah, it was really it was wonderful. It was kind of invitation to join. So that's going back a bit now. That's maybe going back to like 2012 or 13 or something like that. So it's been a while. But yeah, and then before that it was really art, photography to moving image at university, and then short films whilst being an AC. And that was about 9 years between graduating and shooting my first feature, which was a film called Ballast in Mississippi in 2006, I think, early 2006. Yeah, and then after that, I was a DP and could call myself a DP, and then off I went, just movie after movie.
Yeah. Well, that gives me a little bit of hope, because it's been about 9 years since I before I started getting feature docs. So we're on the path.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, yeah, it's just
Slow and steady, you know.
slow and steady. Exactly.
All right. Well, the like I said, man, the film is absolutely phenomenal. I've been just telling everyone who will listen that they need to block off a day to go see it.
Right.
Um, how many times have you watched it? Because that's a commitment.
Yeah, I probably watched it. I don't know, 6 or 7. You know.
Okay, so you weren't like sitting in the color grade like, all right, do it again.
Yeah,
Do it
yeah,
again.
yeah. No, and then as an actual movie, I've seen it about 6 or 7 times. You know, just with audiences, which is good, like at Camera Image and sort of the Vista on 70 mil with my parents, and
Oh, cool.
yeah. So just yeah, it's nice. It's really nice to see it with an audience. And at the BSC, I saw it. So it's nice to see it with cinematographers and a different. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
always a pleasure to see it. I'm so proud of the film.
You should be, man. It's truly like, and I'm positive it's going to go down as like one of those ones that everyone goes, hey, have you seen that yet? Because that's, it's The Godfather, it's Star Wars. You got to watch Brutalist next. Uh,
Amazing. Thank
That's
you.
a good one. And please release it on 4K Blu-ray.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Right on. Well, yeah, next time you're able, man, I'd love to have you back on. It's a great chat.
Thanks, Kenny. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Take care.
All right. You too. Bye bye.
Frame and Reference is an Albot production, produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to frameandrefpod.com and clicking on the Patreon button. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.